lots of scary information out there about are we in a housing bubble? I'm going to give you one of the most compelling things that I've heard that shows that we're not coming up next. Hey, what's going on, friends? Lots of scary information in the news these days about are we at the top of the market? Is there a bubble? Is it about to burst? What's going to happen? Interest rates are going up, all that kind of stuff. And like we've talked about in the past, it's important to look at data and differences in data because that kind of gives us some insight into what's happening now and what may happen into the future. And I came across a just interesting piece of information in a book called The Psychology of Money, which is highly recommended. If you haven't read it, I recommend that you do. Lots of good information in there. But one of the key takeaways I got that was related to the housing market was there was a discussion about short-term versus long-term investors and how they affect each other and their psyche and the decisions that they make. And one of the pieces of data that they illustrated this with was the housing market in the early 2000s. And I had never heard this before, in all of the data that we look at and information and analysis that we look at. This is a piece of data that was really interesting because I hadn't seen it kind of in the conventional wisdom of comparing the markets then to now. And what they talked about was the short-term flipper and the number of short-term sales that were happening in the early 2000s. So in 2000, on average, there was about 20,000 homes per quarter that would sell within the same 12 months of them being bought or within 12 months of being purchased. And that between 2000 and 2004 went up to 100,000 per quarter. So it went up 5 times between 2000 and 2004 because what people were doing in that market were they were just short-term flipping homes. So they were borrowing money, and we talked about this before, right? Easy money was available, so they could speculate, borrow money, buy a house, resell it 6, 8, 10 months later, make $20,000-$50,000 in profit, and just continue to do that. And so there was a lot of people in the housing market that were buying homes with no intent to hold them for a long period of time and just to resell them and make that short-term gain, kind of like a day trader in the stock market, right? They're not buying that stock for the long term. They're buying it so they can make a couple bucks on the stock in a day, and that's their intent. So it's a different intent in terms of what their investing strategy is. And so that was going on somewhat in the housing market. Most people buy a home for the long run, right? They're buying it to be in it for 10, 20, 30 years. They're not buying it to resell it within 6 months. And there was a lot of that going on that fueled the price appreciation during that time. And because of all the financial shenanigans that were going on behind it with people borrowing money that they didn't qualify for, that was a big contributor to the housing bubble expanding and then eventually bursting. And so if you compare that to today, I've talked to many realtors across the country, not just in our market, but in other markets to see what their experience has been. And it seems like across the board, and definitely this has been my experience, I haven't sold a home to a speculator. Nobody on my team has sold a home to a speculator in years, right? I mean, very rarely do you sell a home and then have that same person resell it within 12 months. People are buying homes. This market run-up has been really fueled by people who are buying, that are coming into the market new, that maybe are a first-time home buyer or a second home buyer that's looking to retire somewhere in a different market like the Big Island. And so they're not really buying to then just resell it 6 months later and try and make 20, 30, 40, 50,000 on a quick appreciation. And so that's a big difference in the buyer profile. And like we've talked about before, the people that are buying today are not buying with marginally borrowed money. They're borrowing with a significant amount of money down. They're borrowing with cash. They're well qualified, so they have the ability to pay that mortgage back if something happens financially to them. So very different markets, and something that is important to consider when you're looking at all the scary news is what are they basing that off of, right? Because these are the kinds of data points that we got to look at to see, okay, what is actually going on in the market behind the scenes, the nitty-gritty stuff that you really got to look at to see if we're in a similar type situation. It can feel the same because prices are going up quickly and it feels like a frenzy, but really the fundamental dynamics behind the buyers and sellers are different than they were back in the early 2000s. So just wanted to share with you guys that and the book recommendation. So much good information in The Psychology of Money. Get it, read it, mind-blowing, lots of great information. If you have any questions, you can always put them in the comments below or email me at dylan@buyabigisland.com, and I'll get back to you. See you guys next week. Aloha.